very much, Mr. Suhel Seth, for joining us today in this conversation. It's wonderful to have you here with us. And we're talking about COVID, economy, resurrection, people, the elite. Suhel Seth is the founder and managing partner of the consulting firm Counselage India. You're a columnist, actor, keynote speaker, and a TV pundit. And as we all know it, you are the man who says it like it is. Very warm welcome, sir, to the conversation today. And without further ado, let me get to my very first conversation point, which is about the business and the business of COVID. What do you think, sir, is happening? There's so much, right from social distancing to businesses going out of fashion, existence, survival. What is the impact overall on India? How has India changed post-COVID?
I think the world has changed. It is the first thing, to my mind, that has brought the world on even keel, on the same plane, as it were. Mm-hmm. It's a virus that is geography neutral, that is caste, creed, strata neutral. We don't have a cure for it. We don't even know what the repercussions are going to be. But what it has done is it has crippled the world. It has changed the way we live, the way we work, the way we play, the way we as human beings engage with other human beings. People have been in several countries under a lockdown, which has its own impact. They're coming to terms, they're introspecting, and most importantly, they're recognizing that there will be a new normal, and that new normal that will exist will create a lot of havoc, because human beings by nature thrive on predictability. They thrive on the normal. They thrive on, what they are accustomed to or what they're familiar with. So when things like this happen, they bring about a lot of change. A lot of people have talked about, the Spanish flu, the Great Famine of Bengal, the Wall Street crash of 1929, the aftermath of 9/11, the crash again in 2008. Then they've talked about all the various inflection points that the world has experienced in history. But I don't think the world has experienced an inflection point of this nature, where both lives and livelihoods are at stake, with no solution in sight. Even the world's most powerful man, Donald Trump, and the world's most powerful country is on its knees today. So, at times there is always a glimmer of hope from somewhere. World War II had a glimmer of hope because of the leaders it threw up, whether it was the Churchills, the Delano Roosevelts, the FDRs of the world. You had some hope. Today, even leadership is lacking in most parts of the world. The leaders themselves are in disarray. So with such rampant confusion and unpredictability, what you're going to be seeing is a world riddled with confusion, and confusion always gives rise to fear. And fear is not a good sign for businesses or lives to thrive in. Fear is a negative sentiment. It's not something that fosters hope, that creates windows of opportunity. Having said all of this, I, as an eternal optimist, believe in two things: in the extreme resilience of the human spirit, and more importantly, in the resilience of the average Indian. We are an old civilization. We've seen a lot of challenges which have afflicted us economically. We have seen the partition of India, which was a social catastrophe. We have then gone into various forms of divisiveness, which we have hopefully come out of. So I still believe that India will walk out of this less bruised, but the bruising will be there for sure.
So you talked about negative sentiment and, the uncertainty, the fear which is there in the human fraternity right now. There's also, the fear is kind of leading to a lot of people going towards spirituality. Spiritual leaders, particularly in India and this part of the world, were always there. What do you think, sir? I have an interesting question there, which is that, it is spirituality, as I was reading somewhere, has become a new love interest for many. So including activities like, you have practicing yoga, meditation, chanting, spiritualism, and so on and so forth. Some claim to cleanse themselves. What are your thoughts on this? Is it not negating the acceptance, or is it actually the way to nirvana?
I was on a webinar of this kind with Sri Ravi Shankar, who is a spiritual guru through his art of living in India. And he interestingly said, he says the difference between spirituality and religion is spirituality is the banana, religion is the banana skin. So what we confuse for the core is actually the skin that we are looking at. And sometimes we mistake religion for being the sucker of hope. But then Marx was right when he said religion is the opium of the masses. What we need is spirituality. And, I don't want to get into a big debate on whether spiritualism is good or I have a simple logic in life. You must be able to sleep well comfortably at night, knowing that you haven't harmed anyone or harmed the world. A. B. Each person is entitled to his own comfort level with spirituality or with a superior being. Number 3, we all live with our own demons or our gods, as it were. So I think if we are confident in our own skin and in our own mind of doing right by what is right, then I don't think we need to, hold on to pegs of a higher order or something that is extraneous, because whatever that will be or whatever that might be is just, to my mind, superficial and may go tomorrow. Having said that, I was a bit astounded and pleasantly surprised to see that in that webinar with Sri, there were 2.2 million people across the world. So obviously the world is going through, and we don't need to be a rocket scientist, the world is going through a kind of trauma that it hasn't experienced before. See, loss of life, which is predictable owing to underlying illnesses, is one thing. But a loss of life which happens for no fault of yours or for no, lifestyle options that you've chosen is quite another. Add to that the fear psychosis, which is economically driven as well as socially driven, leads to a completely different ballgame that we're going to experience and that we will experience.
Fantastic. So, talking about spirituality and then about the whole lifestyle changes that are happening. Everything is now online. 2.2 million followers coming in for Shri, webinars happening, all kinds of things, song and dance happening digitally, and people trying to be relevant. Are we getting into an unprecedented amount of participation in generating such content? Is there a hunger for followership and staying relevant right now?
I think that's a great question. I'm a great believer that we are seeing an overload of information and an overload of what I would call disparate and at times desperate content. This is where filters will need to be applied by people who are consuming these messages. Every other day there's a new theory about what the virus does. There's a new theory about what will happen in terms of the lockdown. There's a new hypothesis on how the world order will change. I think people need to pull back. They need to get away from this rush of being relevant by forwarding messages which are both trite and silly. Because I don't think in those messages or from those messages, they will receive either any information or hope. So while we are all embracing this new digital order, like everything in India and everything actually across the world, when we decide to do something, we kind of overload it for unnecessary reasons, which I think we should be very wary of and cognizant of.
Do you think COVID is a creation of WhatsApp, or is it actually real on ground?
It is real. I mean, people are dying. They're not dying because of WhatsApp. I mean, they could die of WhatsApp because WhatsApp has suddenly had many stupid people trying to become relevant. But that's another matter. COVID is real, but what is not real and what needs to be tempered and what needs to be measured is the way we communicate issues through WhatsApp or through any other digital, asset. The point is that everyone rightfully and rightly so has an opinion. That opinion needs to be measured against reality. it can't be an opinion that is just received and then immediately forwarded, either because of mental lethargy or intellectual incompetence. But that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing this surfeit, this purposefulness in forwarding everything that you get, without actually, measuring up to what is exactly the mode and the mechanism of delivery as well as of receiving that information.
Mm, mm, mm. So let me just take you now to a different side of things. You're so exposed yourself. I mean, not just from a particular medium perspective. You're exposed to people, thought leaders globally, and particularly when I read this book, I think that there's another article that I saw of yours which talked about India's elite and how are they coping up, how do they cope up with situations, their reactions, their lives in general. What do you think is happening there? We know what's happening with migration, people coming together in ISBT or Surat or Basadas and Kota and other things. What's happening currently with India's elite? What are they doing? Social distancing, stay at home.
They're doing the same thing as all of us. And I think they're being even more careful so that they're not called out for violating the lockdown. So I don't think the elite in any measure or way is doing something completely different from what you and I are doing. But what are they worried about? Obviously, when the stakes are higher, so is the stress. Stress is completely proportional to stake. I mean, you have nothing to lose. Your stress levels are going to be negligible compared to the person who has a lot to lose. And I think people who are leading industry, people who are leading, who are actually part of the ruling class, people who are thought leaders, their worry is how do you measure up and how do you stem the hemorrhaging that is bound to happen? How do you prepare for a new world order? How do you prepare for a new way of living, a new way of working, and a new way of social engagement? How do you actually build that empathy, build that compassion? How do you create a oneness? How do you integrate society rather than divide it? And how do you bring back or measure up to the less privileged or the more deprived and bring them to even keel so that you can assuage their worries, assuage their concerns, assuage their fears? Because I think leadership is not about just leading. Leadership is about engagement. It's about involvement and it's about inspiration. So you can engage, involve, and inspire. That, to my mind, is the hallmark of a true leader. So those leaders will also be undergoing their levels of consternation and stress to figure out what exactly is it that they need to do in order to, prevent this hemorrhaging from happening in the manner that it is likely to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, point, it is, of course, the prevention and the cure will both happen by some thought leaders, but of course, it will be a larger collective action. That takes me to the other point that we saw news coming in, the recommendations by IRS officials, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think? I mean, a lot of people think, you talked about industrialists and the business leaders. A lot of people think that the government is taking too much time. It is too long a wait and watch. What is happening? What are we looking forward to as businessmen of the country?
I think the government, actually, let me rephrase it. I think the Prime Minister has been completely let down by his Council of Ministers and by his bureaucrats. The Prime Minister's job is to galvanize a nation into one thought process, which I think Modi did a brilliant job of when he declared a lockdown. Now, there could be two sides to that, whether 4 hours was enough notice or not, but that's, we are great naysayers in our country. But I think, yet again, what the government did was they made an announcement and they had no backup plan. I'm not a left liberal, nor am I a right winger. I'm a simple citizen of this beloved country of mine. And I feel what we've done with migrant labor and what we've done with human frailty is sacrilegious. It is completely condone-worthy. I also believe that what the Scots have done is actually let down the country in a dramatic way. For the Supreme Court to behave in the way it has, even though it has stellar judges on its bench, but for it to actually absolve itself of responsibility of bringing the executive to book, to my mind, is a great disservice to this fine country. Having said all of that, I think the government needs to pull its socks up. It needs to do far more. It needs to do far more quickly, and it needs to do it in simplistic terms. The problem with India is our bureaucrats will jargonate any simple edict or any simple circular, any simple message. I mean, we are sitting today on the 1st of May 2020, and on the 3rd of May, the lockdown, it's the last day of the lockdown. And from the 4th, they're supposedly back at work. What does the government do? In the afternoon of the 1st of May, it decides on zoning the country, which, by the way, is fair. So you have orange, you have red, you have green. But do you tell people what the hell that means? You know, factories are not pop-up shops. It's not like producing popcorn that you suddenly tell people, from the 4th, we're opening. What does that mean? What does orange mean? What does red mean? What does green mean? It is the pathetic nature of our bureaucracy that needs a rap on its knuckles. And I think the bureaucracy in Modi's government has let Modi down the most. It's not the opposition, it's no one else, but it's his own bureaucrats who have blundered from one mistake to the other. They remind me of the Keystone cops who come after a crime has been committed and then don't know what to do. So this paralysis through excessive analysis is what is causing India its greatest worry. And that, to my mind, needs stronger control by the Prime Minister. You had those IRS jokers who issued a white paper on 40% income tax. I mean, these are people who have just come into the system, have no understanding, no stake, but it is their feeling that because of the power they wield, and sometimes unfairly so, that they can actually create policies which will cause even more harm to the country. Look at the other thing. Today, all your vital sectors are in deep, deep pain. If you look at your largest employer, tourism is the largest employer generator. Real estate, steel, these are bellwether industries. Auto, we don't have a plan. So my point is that you cannot have a country of the size of 1.3 billion people, which needs at least an 8 to 9% growth in GDP, bumbling in this particular manner. Because what's going to happen is the after effects will exist for 3 to 4 years. People are talking about 1 quarter or 2 quarters. I see this happening for the next 3 to 4 years. What are you going to do to people who lose their jobs and are yet fearful of their life? What are you going to do to people who are the middle class salaried people who are going to lose their jobs or incur wage cuts when their entire lifestyles are under threat because of the EMIs that they have to pay out? So I don't think we've planned this well. If you look at our banking sector, to my mind, the Reserve Bank of India and its Governor Shaktikant Das are one of the saving graces of this government or this administration, because they're not part of government, as it were. And I think the RBI has done more to provide support to India's financial woes than anyone else in government or outside.
So what do you think, sir, should be done then? I mean, what do you think are the action points? So, of course, there are plenty, both on the tactical side and also on the sentimental side, but 3 things that the government should be doing right now.
Number 1, we need defined fiscal stimulus within a defined time frame. That has not happened. People have said, we'll give you 2,000 rupees or 1,000 rupees or 4,000 rupees in your Jan Dhan accounts. That's rubbish. While it exists, it's fine. There is no sectoral-wise succor being given or plans being publicized. For instance, if the tourism sector has written to the government as it has under the auspices of faith, where is the government's measured response to that? You can't have an overarching one-size-fits-all solution when sectors need specific either hand-holding or stimuli. That is missing in India. Number 3, we don't have a plan for government expenditure and government funds to return to people who are owed that money from the government, whether it is through tax refunds, whether it's through GST for states, whether it is through, pandemic funding that comes from time to time. We don't have a plan. So what we see are proposals. This government, for some strange reason, is damn good at making plans which no one commits to, which never materialize. So it's all right for me to say that, oh, we are now looking at the aerospace sector, but what the hell are you doing about it? How are you going to reopen civil aviation? What is going to happen to the massive losses that we are going to incur in, again, a sector which is a large employer? What are we going to do about healthcare? We spend 1.23% of our GDP on healthcare, whereas we should be spending anywhere between 8 to 9%. But we spend more on defense. And look at the priorities. These jokers, some of the jokers in government are busier getting hold of the Delhi Gymkhana Club than actually working towards providing relief to the masses who are actually suffering. So when the priorities are all mixed up, and when all you want is populism, and when all you seek is the right noise levels, you're going to miss the woods for the trees. And again, I'm saying, while the Prime Minister may have his heart in the right place, I genuinely believe that he's being misled or let down by the people who are working under him, because it is not his job to prepare a sectoral-wise relief plan. It is not his job to understand the nuances of a heavily taxed economy. It is not his job to see how each sector and what kinds of relief the sectors need. You will need changes in labor contracts. You will need your justice system at certain levels to be far more agile. You're still talking about the Supreme Court going ahead with taking its 6-week summer vacation when the Delhi High Court has decided to forego it. So I'm saying, while the Prime Minister has been able to galvanize one country into one lockdown, there are so many, facets within the government that are pulling at each other that are preventing this measured step from actually having some long-term solutions. I've always said sometimes we live in a country which has a problem for every solution and not the other way around.
I think economy is a very, very long discussion, and I agree. I mean, we don't really seem to be seeing a planned response so far. Now let's take to the other side of the discussion. We saw the economic side. What about the socio-economic changes, the social changes, people happening from, we're saying that it's very, very positive from an environment perspective and from people coming together. There's a human-in-human interaction. Organizations are now talking about work from home becoming a completely different, the new mantra. How do you think the corporate cultures will change, corporate humanity will change after this?
See, I think a couple of things are going to happen. Number one, companies, because of the reason that I've mentioned before, are going to indulge in very severe cost cutting. That in itself will have ramifications on the way they travel, on the way they live, on the way they work. Number two, a lot of companies have experienced that the work from home model is working. Once that happens, you will not need to hire or rent expensive real estate to, staff your offices. Number three, and this is a critical point, what you will also see is that the engagement levels within an organization will change. So what you can do digitally, you will avoid doing face-to-face. So that saves a lot of time, but more importantly, it is more focused and it saves a lot of money. So that's bound to happen. Will it happen and remain in the long term? I don't know. Many years ago, when I used to sit on the British Airways board, people said, oh, video conferences will eliminate air travel. It didn't happen. So I don't know if it will be a long-term solution. I don't think the average Indian will scale down his desire or his delight in the great Indian wedding. I don't think we will be miserly when it comes to celebrating our festivals, and nor should we be. So while we will adopt and adapt to certain behavioral changes qua social distancing, I don't think essentially the way we live will change. Yes, what will change is our relationships. Because what this lockdown has done is it has created a worldview within people to actually figure who and what were the relationships that you were in that were really meaningful. What did you really mean when you talked to people? So What I see is a great change in terms of social behavior. I see a great change in terms of social responsibility, because we are now looking out and looking after more and more people than we imagined we would ever. We are becoming a more empathetic nation. CSR is no longer something on the balance sheet. It's also, as I said in an article earlier this month, it's the size of the heart that matters. It is not just the size of the checkbook. So I see a lot of good emanating from this. But as I've said, I'm an eternal optimist. I believe a lot of good will come out of it. There will be short-term pain in some sectors and severe long-term pain in others. This is where the government, the prime minister, industry leaders, social leaders, spiritual leaders need to come out. They need to be empathetic. We don't need pronouncements and announcements. We need conversations. We need engagement. You know, Trump, whatever you think of him, but he's having a daily press conference, which says a lot. So I think that engagement pattern has to change. Our media will have to introspect in terms of what they carry. You know, they can't always be stories of despair. We've got so many unsung heroes in India. The medical fraternity are today's new stars. We need to recognize that. We need to recognize them, and we need to give them the salutation. We need to give them the credit that they deserve, that they so richly deserve. So I think that's what we need to kind of focus on and figure for the days ahead of us.
You raised an interesting point, about Trump and whatever his feedback or perceptions are right now doing around. But do you see at the end of this epidemic stronger leaders emerging? Either this will make a leader or this will break a leader. Do you think that happening?
You know, I believe it's not going to be automatic. Many leaders, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, the Prime Minister of Australia, Angela Merkel in Germany, Macron in France, have shown, even the Italian Prime Minister, they've shown far greater leadership skills than we would have imagined from them. So while it will throw up a new way of leading countries, I think it will also throw up a new brand and a new strain of leadership. And that leadership will, as I said, have to be more empathetic. It'll actually have to work on the grassroots and have to work towards solving problems. You know, gone are the days when you can go back once in 5 years for their vote. You will have to show a lot more than just, the superficial stuff.
Great. So you talked about different countries and how leaders in different countries are handling this situation, sir. I'll just take my last question and then we will move to the question and answer session. I see a few questions coming in already. Talking about how COVID situation has been dealt globally, we are seeing successful examples of different countries who are coming up and how they've handled things. It's being said that if China's lost opportunity was not captured by India, it would be India's biggest loss of the century. Do you think that's right? We see a lot of it moving already to Vietnam as far as manufacturing is concerned.
Yeah, but as I said, it seems the logical thing to do, where China will take a hit. But remember, businesses work not on emotion. They primarily work rationally. China has two things going for it: a large consuming population and a large manufacturing history. I don't think countries like India can replace it in a hurry, no matter what we might say in the spirit of nationalism. Oh, we will, better China, blah, blah, blah. If we had to, we would have done that a long time ago. Our policy paralysis, our regulations are still so warped. I don't think it's going to happen in a hurry. So don't imagine that Bombay will become the next Shanghai. It hasn't for the last 20 years. I don't think it's going to happen in the next 2.
So my last question on that, sir, would be alluding is that, what do you think will happen? You are a part of so many boardrooms. What is the current boardroom conversation? How long are the companies planning for? Is there a 12-month planning anymore left?
No one has a 12-month plan anymore. People are planning for after the lockdown. People are planning in terms of what's going to happen. People are, they're not planning in that sense. Oh, boy, where will we where will we live and how will we live. So I don't think that's bound to happen. I also don't think that boardrooms will worry about 2022, because what they will worry about is 2020. My other feeling is that most of these companies are so beholden and so in the loop by analysts that they live from quarter to quarter. So I don't think you're going to see massive forward planning, because again, the situation is very fluid. I don't blame boards. I don't blame companies. Situations are very fluid. No one had imagined we would exist this way in January this year. So it's almost changing every day. And when it changes every day, these are the problems that you're confronted with.
Absolutely. Massive indeed. So, sir, at this time, let's move to the question and answers. We have a few questions coming in, and I welcome more questions coming in from the audiences as well. So the first question, I'll not take them in any specific order. I'll just go through them as they come. Pallavi asks, where is BJP headed? Is this epidemic good for them?
There's a very famous book. It's called Everybody Loves a Good Famine, which basically says from crises, a lot of political parties benefit. I don't know if the pandemic is good for the BJP. What I worry about is the lack of an opposition. Having said that, I think it is in Modi's interest and in the BJP's interest to build an opposition. Because when there's an opposition, there will be divided responsibilities, but more importantly, there'll be divided attention. Right now, the entire focus is on the BJP. And I think the BJP, like any political party, see, it's not the BJP's job to create an opposition. So everyone blaming Modi that there's no, opposition, it's stupid. I mean, it's not his business to create competition for himself. But it is the business of democracy to have a robust opposition. And tragically, the grand old party, in this case, the Indian National Congress, is so rudderless, is so indecisive, and obfuscates on the major issues that face the country. Having said all of that, one has to give credit where it's due. Rahul Gandhi did and continuously did mention, as way back as in February, about the pandemic and about the havoc it would unleash. But we were so busy preparing to welcome Donald J. Trump that we forgot that we would be, heading for this kind of a life. That's how it is.
So, we talked about the international attention and international pecking order changing. What do you think would be the right course of action for China when this gets over?
To apologize, to shut wet markets, and to pay tons and tons of trillions of dollars in compensation to the economies they have ravaged. They are an irresponsible country. They don't belong to the comity of nations. They're arrogant. And what is worse is they're inhuman in their behavior, in their outlook. That arrogance needs to be tempered. And let me tell you, the only way countries are given a rap on the knuckles is when they're made economically irrelevant or economically impoverished. If you do that to China, you have some hope. But otherwise, China's track record of human misery is so well documented and too well known for me to offer any counterpoint. So I think don't expect any behavioral changes from China. The world must change its behavior towards China. China will not change.
Will that actually happen? Will the world change its behavior?
I don't know. Xi Jinping should be ostracized from every global forum. Their membership of the United Nations and all its subsidiaries must be revoked, and they must be taught a lesson. And I'm not saying, I don't want to get into the conspiracy theory whether Corona was a Wuhan lab product or not. The fact is they hid the reality from the world and are now making money on the world's discomfort and the world's dismay at having to deal with this pandemic.
Interesting. So another view on someone else coming in, a question which asks, what are your thoughts on Rahul Gandhi's interview with Raghuram Rajan?
I saw the interview, it was superb. And I'll tell you why it was good. I think Rahul asked the questions that we all wanted to ask, but we didn't know who to ask them to. Rahul didn't come across as the repository of wisdom. He allowed Raghuram to speak. And I think Raghuram given his experience both as an economist and as the head of our central bank, spoke with measured rationale and spoke very well. He addressed all the issues that were asked of him. And I think it was a great conversation. I tuned into it, and I was very happy with the way the whole conversation was structured. I don't want to get into the politics, whether it was live or to be live. That's all rubbish. The fact is that Rahul Gandhi was one politician in India who engaged with the outside world and engaged with them well, and engaged with someone who was knowledgeable on the subject.
Another question which comes, why is, I think it goes back to what you were mentioning about Trump being there and talking through conferences every day. Why is our Prime Minister not doing any press conferences and still chooses to give us orders from the comfort of his home? Why is he not having a conversation?
That's who he is. That's who he is. I mean, and it's unfair to say, oh, Modi's become like this. Modi was always like this. I mean, Trump is doing these daily press conferences because of Corona. Otherwise, Trump has disregarded media for a long time. So to each his own. But that's who we are with. And that's who you and I have voted for. I mean, not me. I haven't voted for anyone. But that's who we voted for. That's what this country is voted for.
So another question comes, and to the point that you were mentioning about media itself. A lot of misinformation being spread. What are your thoughts? And my question on top of that would be where to look for information if half of it is fake? So more than half of it is fake.
A lot of people ask me this question, where do we look? I mean, I hate to say this, look towards the West. Look towards papers like The Guardian, look to magazines like The Atlantic, look to, portals like Alt News and that kind of thing. Because, it's very easy for us to say, oh, newspapers are giving us misinformation. For God's sake, we must also use our own brains. We must use our own intellect, our own intelligence to be able to sift the wheat from the chaff. To say that, oh, we are being given a surfeit of fake news. I mean, you've got to have the intelligence and the skills and the chutzpah to know what is real and what is fake. And if you don't, then you deserve the kind of information or the media that you get.
There's one question which comes and says, is COVID a necessary reset we needed in terms of environment, our society, and personal lives?
I don't know. I think it would be unfair to use the word, is it needed? You don't need anything that causes misery, death, and economic, havoc. I think will it reset the environment? Of course, because it'll change the way we live. It'll change the way we work. Well, certainly in the short term. I don't know whether we will go back to our errant ways later, but certainly in the short term, we will change the way we live and the way we work.
Perfect. And then there's a comment, of course, that, we're forgetting Modi ji's connection with the SAARC nations. I think that's more of a comment than a question. There's a very, then I think to kind of take the conversation to its conclusion, as Aarti asks, do you cook? How are you going through this time?
No, I love cooking. I love reading. I love watching movies, TV serials, the usual stuff. And I have so many webinars to do. So I'm as busy. In fact, I was telling someone I'm busier now than I've been busy when we didn't have a lockdown. And you're also getting to spend quality time with your family, with my wife, with my daughter, with my mother. So, I think you have to see the glimmer of hope. Right. You have to see the silver lining on every cloud rather than the dark lining on every silver cloud. And sometimes we confuse the two because we take it upon ourselves to portray ourselves as victims of a heinous activity such as a lockdown. So I think it's all good. I'm enjoying myself. I'm cooking like mad almost daily and enjoying it.
Fantastic. So any last words of wisdom? How does a common man manage the current situation of uncertainty, confusion, possible job loss, possible health loss?
I don't know if it was Bernard Shaw or Oscar Wilde. The only way to manage life is to have your wits about you. Have your wits about you. This too shall pass. We've seen a lot worse. This too shall pass. And beyond that, there's nothing I can say. I'm not a spiritual guru who will guide you in meditation or guide you towards pastures of hope into the fields of glory. I think where we are is where we are. The common man is as deeply grieved as anyone else. And I think we need to recognize that this is a battle that's going to be fought strong, it's going to be fought hard, and sadly fought for a long time.
Great. Viresh asks a question, sir. Can India afford a huge bailout package? As from what I have read there is a lurking danger of being downgraded by rating agencies, leading to capital outflow. The West have much better balance sheets.
Yeah, but here's the thing. It's not a bailout, it's a stimulus. We use words very casually like bailout and all. A, B, it's not about whether the West has money or don't have money or rating agencies. You are today looking at survival of sectors and therefore at survival of human beings who are working in those sectors. I don't think, just like you didn't have a choice about the lockdown, you don't have a choice of what you call a bailout and what I call a stimulus. It is inevitable.
Do you think it'll come?
It has to. I don't think Modi or anyone can risk unemployment, people out on the streets, this kind of ravaging of the Indian economy. Because we don't, as you rightly said, or as Viresh said, we don't have the necessary deep pockets to be able to weather this storm. So we have to do whatever it takes without worrying about rating agencies for the short term.
But I would just add one last question, one last point on that is, when will it come? Because there was 30th of April yesterday. There was some,
Exactly, Deepshikha, that's what I told you. That the tragedy with this government is that you don't know what they're planning. Everything is goddamn last minute. But someone's got to tell them that there's a difference between a stimulus and between getting onto your balcony and lighting candles or clanging utensils. Now, if someone were to tell these people that this is what they need to do, then hopefully they'll do it. But till now, the media is cozying up, everyone else is cozying up. There are few voices of a contrarian nature. And the sad part is those contrarian voices, which may seem as dissenting, are seen to be anti-national rather than ones that are pointing you in the right direction. So that's something also that we need to be cognizant of.
Absolutely. Last question there before we close the conversation. We are moving towards the closure time. What book do you recommend in this space? I see a lot of them sitting behind you.
No, so I've been reading various kinds of books. I don't know, surprisingly, I've been reading 2 books in rapid succession on our judiciary. So one which I recommend is From the Trenches by Abhishek Singhvi. And the other, which is a brilliant book by Chintan Chandrachud. It's called The Cases That India Forgot. And the reason I think why I'm recommending these is it gives you an insight both into India's history as also into the way India and its people through the courts fought either for civil liberty or fought for what is right and what is just.
Great. So, ladies and gentlemen, last question before we close. But I'll take this one. Kunal Malhotra asks from Autobahn asks, what impact do you think will the Wuhan virus have on social norms, like social get-togethers, including clubs, etc.? Will these precautions be short-lived?
I don't think the precaution will be short-lived. Now, I don't know when the vaccine will happen, but yes, changes will happen. You will see social distancing and all the get-togethers. I don't think people will have parties at home with 100 people or 40 people or 50 people. Restaurants and bars will change their seating formats, will change their serving formats. I don't think hotels will encourage buffet breakfasts anymore where there's crowding. So I'm saying from the absolute detail to the larger picture, things will change and people will change on their own. I mean, I've seen, if you now go to a Spencer's or go to any supermarket, people themselves are maintaining a social distance. You know, when you go for a walk, you're maintaining a social distance. I think that's very slowly becoming the new behavior, the new norm, the new pattern of social engagement. So I think that's bound to happen. But I'm waiting to see an Indian wedding which has only 20 people.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. And with the changes, I hope it all health restores soon and social distances changes to social gatherings again. Thank you very much, Mr. Seth, for joining us today. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.